If you are spending $50, $80, $100 a year on tomato fertilizer alone, there is a plant that does the same job for free. And it does not stop after one season. It comes back every spring on its own, produces 4 to 5 harvests of nutrient-dense leaves between April and October, and keeps going for 20 years or more without replanting, without feeding, without asking you for a single thing except to be cut. That plant is Comfrey. Specifically, a variety called Bocking 14. And the reason most gardeners have never heard of it, or worse, have been told to avoid it, is one of the strangest stories in modern horticulture. A story that has nothing to do with how the plant performs in a garden, and everything to do with a regulatory scare that confused what you swallow with what you feed your soil. But before we get to that, let me explain what Comfrey actually does in a garden. Because once you understand the biology, the economics become almost impossible to ignore. Comfrey is a perennial. You plant it once from a root cutting, not from seed, because Bocking 14 is a sterile hybrid that produces no viable seeds. That sterility is a feature, not a flaw. It means the plant stays exactly where you put it. No spreading, no seeding into your lawn or your neighbor's beds, no invasive takeover. It grows where you plant it and nowhere else. What it does in that spot is remarkable. Each spring, Comfrey sends up thick, broad leaves from a taproot that reaches 3 to 6 feet into the ground. Most vegetable roots stay in the top 12 inches of soil. Comfrey drills past that shallow zone and into subsoil layers where potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals sit locked away, completely out of reach for your tomatoes, peppers, and beans. The taproot pulls those nutrients up and loads them into the leaves. Every leaf becomes a concentrated package of fertility drawn from a depth your vegetables will never access on their own. This is what soil scientists call nutrient mining. The plant is not creating nutrients from nothing, it is relocating them, pulling minerals from deep storage and delivering them to the surface in a form your garden can use immediately. No factory, no bag, no cost. Just biology doing what it has done for thousands of years. And the numbers behind those leaves are what make Comfrey genuinely exceptional among green manures. On a dry weight basis, Bocking 14 leaves test at roughly 2 to 3% nitrogen, about 1% phosphorus, and potassium levels that can reach 6 to 7%. That potassium figure is the standout. It is 3 to 4 times higher than what you find in typical farmyard manure. For any gardener growing fruiting crops, tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, strawberries, fruit trees, potassium is the nutrient that drives flower set, fruit size, and flavor. It is exactly what those plants are hungriest for during the critical weeks of summer production. And Comfrey delivers more of it, for free, than most commercial fertilizers you can buy in a bag. Here is the part that surprises people the most. You do not compost the leaves and wait weeks for them to break down. Comfrey leaves have an unusually low fiber content compared to other green manures. When you cut them and lay them directly on the soil as mulch, a method called chop and drop, they wilt and begin decomposing within days. Not weeks, days. The nutrients release quickly into the topsoil, right at the root zone of whatever crop you place them around. Where grass clippings or straw might sit on the surface for a month before breaking down meaningfully, Comfrey leaves are already feeding the soil while the grass clippings are still drying out. And this is not a one-time trick. Once established, which takes one full growing season after planting, a healthy Comfrey plant can be cut to the ground 4 to 5 times per year. Every 4 to 5 weeks during the growing season, the leaves grow back thick enough to harvest again. Each cut gives you another round of free, potassium-rich mulch, or the raw material for liquid fertilizer. The cycle repeats from spring through autumn, year after year, for 2 decades or more. The plant asks for nothing in return. No fertilizer, no irrigation in most climates, no pest control, no annual replanting. It simply grows, gets cut, and grows again. For anyone who has been buying bags of tomato feed or liquid fertilizer every few weeks through summer, The math shift is immediate. A single comfrey plant produces enough leaf material in one season to side dress several tomato plants multiple times. A small patch of 6 to 10 plants, which fits comfortably along a fence line or beside a compost bin, generates enough fertility to cover a serious kitchen garden through the entire growing season. The first year costs you a few dollars for root cuttings. Every year after that costs nothing. But there is a reason comfrey is not sitting on the shelf at every garden center. A reason most big box nurseries do not carry it, most gardening magazines rarely mention it, and most extension offices do not actively recommend it, despite the research backing it up. That reason has nothing to do with how the plant works in soil. It has to do with a health scare from over 20 years ago that got tangled up with the wrong part of the plant, and the confusion has never been properly corrected. The result is one of the most useful plants a home gardener can grow, sitting in a reputational shadow it does not deserve. And clearing up that confusion is worth doing, because it is the single biggest barrier between most gardeners and a free, self-renewing fertility system that actually works. In 2001, the FDA issued warnings and pulled comfrey supplements off store shelves across the United States. The concern was a group of compounds called pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which are found naturally in the plant, concentrated mainly in the roots and to a much lesser degree in the leaves. When ingested in large amounts over time, particularly as teas, capsules, or concentrated root extracts, these compounds can cause serious liver damage. The science behind that concern is legitimate. Nobody disputes it. But here is where the story went sideways. The FDA action targeted comfrey as a dietary supplement, something you swallow. It did not ban growing comfrey. It did not ban using comfrey leaves as mulch, as compost material, or as liquid fertilizer in a garden. There has never been a law, a regulation, or a scientific finding anywhere, not from the FDA, not from the USDA, not from any university extension program, that says using comfrey leaves on your soil is dangerous to people, to crops, or to the environment. The distinction could not be clearer. Do not eat it. But feeding it to your soil is an entirely different biological process. When comfrey leaves are laid on the ground as mulch or steeped in water to make liquid feed, the pyrrolizidine alkaloids in the leaf tissue are broken down by soil microorganisms. They do not accumulate in the soil. They do not transfer into the fruit of your tomatoes or the roots of your carrots. Research on this has been consistent. The alkaloid content in leaves is a fraction of what is found in roots, less than a tenth by most analyses, and what little is present is degraded rapidly once it contacts living soil biology. This is not a gray area. It is well documented. But the headlines in 2001 did not draw that line. The word toxic got attached to the plant itself, not to the specific practice of swallowing concentrated root extract. Garden centers, already cautious about liability, quietly pulled comfrey from their shelves. Nursery catalogs dropped it. The plant did not become illegal to grow. It became inconvenient to sell. And in retail, that is almost the same thing. The result is that one of the most productive fertility plants a home gardener can grow has spent over 2 decades sitting in a reputational hole created by a misunderstanding. Organic growers and permaculture practitioners never stopped using it. They kept passing around root cuttings, sharing results, and building soil with it season after season. But the mainstream gardening world moved on, and most people who would benefit enormously from comfrey have never been told it exists. So now that the safety question is settled, do not eat it, do feed your soil with it, let me walk through exactly how to use this plant in a practical, everyday garden. Because there are 3 distinct methods, each suited to a different situation, and knowing which one to use and when makes the difference between good results and exceptional ones. The first and simplest method is chop and drop. This is the backbone of how most experienced growers use comfrey, and it requires almost no effort. When the leaves are full and tall, usually every 4 to 5 weeks during the growing season, cut the entire plant down to about 2 inches above the ground. Use shears, a sickle, or even a sharp knife. Wear gloves, because the leaves are covered in fine hairs that can irritate skin on prolonged contact. Take the cut leaves and lay them directly on the soil around the base of your fruiting crops. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, eggplant, strawberries, fruit trees. Anything that needs potassium to push flowers and fruit. Do not bury them. Do not chop them finely. Just lay them flat on the surface like a mulch. They will wilt within hours and begin breaking down within days. As they decompose, they release a flush of potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus directly into the root zone. The low fiber content of comfrey leaves means this happens far faster than it would with grass clippings, straw, or shredded leaves. You are delivering a targeted feed exactly where it is needed, exactly when the plant needs it most, during flowering and fruit set. The timing matters. The first cut of the season should wait until the comfrey is well established and the leaves are at least 18 to 20 inches tall. In most US and European climates, that means late April through May for the first harvest. After each cut, the plant regrows in roughly 4 to 5 weeks. Most gardeners get 4 solid harvests per season. Some in warmer climates get 5. Each harvest delivers another round of free fertility. The cumulative nutrient input over a full season is substantial, enough to replace commercial fertilizer entirely for most kitchen garden fruiting crops. The second method is comfrey tea. This is a liquid fertilizer you brew yourself, and it is particularly useful for container growers or anyone who wants to feed plants through watering rather than surface mulching. The process is simple, but the smell is legendary. Pack a bucket or barrel about 2/3 full with fresh comfrey leaves. Add water to cover. Put a lid on it, you will want a lid, and let it sit for 10 days to 2 weeks. The leaves ferment into a dark brown liquid that smells terrible and works beautifully. Dilute it roughly 10 to 1 with water before applying. Pour it at the base of fruiting crops once a week during the heavy production phase of summer. The nutrient profile of comfrey tea varies depending on concentration and steeping time, but typical analyses put it in the range of 2% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and 3% potassium. That potassium number is competitive with, and in some cases higher than, the commercial tomato feeds sold at garden centers for $8 to $12 a bottle. The difference is that a single comfrey patch produces enough leaf material to brew this tea all season long, year after year, at zero cost. The third use is as a compost activator. If you maintain a compost pile, comfrey leaves are one of the fastest ways to kickstart a slow or cold heap. The high nitrogen content and rapid decomposition rate generate a burst of microbial activity and heat. Toss a few armloads of fresh comfrey leaves into a sluggish pile, and within a day or two, the internal temperature will climb noticeably. Where a pile of dry leaves and cardboard might sit for months barely decomposing, adding comfrey to the mix accelerates the entire process. This is especially useful in autumn, when most of the material going into the pile is high-carbon browns, dried leaves, straw, spent garden plants, and the pile needs a nitrogen kick to stay active through the cooler months. 3 methods, 1 plant, and every single one of them replaces something you would otherwise have to buy. That is the economic engine of comfrey, not a one-time savings, but a recurring annual dividend that starts in year 2 and never stops. But there is a catch, and it is the kind of thing you need to know before you plant. Because comfrey's greatest strength, its stubbornness, its refusal to quit, is also the one thing that can work against you if you do not plan ahead. Once comfrey roots are established, they are nearly impossible to remove. That is not an exaggeration. A mature Bocking 14 plant sends its taproot deep into the ground, and every fragment of root left in the soil after digging can regenerate into a new plant. You can pull up what you think is the whole root, miss a 2-inch piece buried 18 inches down, and 6 weeks later, there is a fresh comfrey plant growing exactly where you thought you cleared it. This is a plant that does not take no for an answer. For most gardeners, that persistence is a strength. It means reliability. It means the plant comes back every spring without replanting, without coaxing, without any input at all. But it also means you need to choose the planting location carefully, because wherever you put comfrey, that is where comfrey is going to live. Permanently. Moving it later is not practical. You will spend hours digging and still leave root fragments behind. So before a single cutting goes in the ground, decide where comfrey belongs in your garden for the long term. The best spots are edges and margins, along a fence line, beside a compost bin, at the border of a fruit tree guild, or in a dedicated strip between garden beds. These are places where the plant can do its job without competing with annual vegetables for space. Comfrey leaves spread wide. A mature plant can easily reach 2 to 3 feet across. Give each plant at least 3 feet of spacing so you can access it for cutting without fighting through a wall of bristly foliage. One of the smartest placements is around the drip line of fruit trees. Apple, pear, plum, cherry. Any tree that produces fruit benefits directly from the potassium and phosphorus that comfrey mines from the subsoil. The leaves fall naturally in the root zone of the tree when you chop and drop, feeding it exactly where it feeds. Over years, the soil around a comfrey-ringed fruit tree becomes visibly darker, looser, and richer than the surrounding ground. Experienced orchardists in the UK have used this arrangement for decades, and the results speak through the fruit. Larger, sweeter, and more consistent yields with no purchased fertilizer. Now, planting itself is straightforward, but the timing and method matter for a strong first year. Bocking 14 is planted from root cuttings, not seed. You can buy these from specialty nurseries, permaculture suppliers, or sometimes from other gardeners who are dividing established plants. Each cutting is a piece of root 2 to 6 inches long. That is all you need. One piece of root becomes one plant that lasts 2 decades. The best planting window is early spring, March through April in most of the United States and UK, or early autumn, September through October. Spring planting gives the root cutting the full growing season to establish before winter. Autumn planting works well in milder climates where the ground does not freeze hard, allowing the root to settle in over winter and emerge strong in spring. Plant each cutting horizontally, about 2 to 3 inches below the soil surface. Water it in and leave it alone. Comfrey is not fussy about soil type. It grows in clay, loam, sandy ground, and everything in between. It tolerates partial shade, but produces the most leaf biomass in full sun. It does not need fertilizing, ever. The entire point of the plant is that it feeds itself from deep underground, and then feeds everything around it from the surface. Here is the critical first-year rule that most guides fail to emphasize. Do not harvest comfrey in its first growing season. Let the plant establish its root system fully before you start taking from it. The leaves will grow tall and tempting. Resist. That first year of undisturbed growth is the foundation for 15 to 20 years of production. The taproot needs time to reach depth, build mass, and anchor itself. Cutting too early weakens the root and delays the point where the plant reaches full productivity. In year 2, you can begin harvesting, but start conservatively. Take 2 to 3 cuts that season and let the plant recover fully between each one. By year 3, the plant is mature and you can harvest 4 to 5 times per season without any decline in vigor. From that point forward, it essentially runs on autopilot. Spring arrives, the leaves surge up, you cut them, they grow back, you cut them again. The rhythm is simple, predictable, and endlessly productive. Each winter, the above-ground growth dies back completely. The leaves yellow, collapse, and decompose on the spot, which, incidentally, is one final free feeding for the soil around the plant. Underground, the root sits dormant through the cold months, unharmed by frost, freezing temperatures, or snow cover. Comfrey is hardy through USDA Zone 3, which covers nearly the entire continental United States and most of northern Europe. When the soil warms in spring, the plant returns. Every year, without fail. For anyone used to annual crops that need replanting each season, or perennial herbs that gradually weaken and need dividing, Comfrey's consistency is almost disorienting. It just keeps producing, year after year after year. The only maintenance is cutting the leaves, which takes a few minutes per plant, and that cutting is not maintenance in the traditional sense. It is harvesting the product. The work is the reward. Now, let me connect the financial picture, because this is where the real shift happens for most gardeners. A typical home gardener growing tomatoes, peppers, squash, and a few fruit bushes might spend $60 to $120 per season on fertilizer. Liquid tomato feed, granular all-purpose, maybe a bag of bone meal or potash. Those products get used, get washed away, and need replacing every year. Over 5 years, that is $300 to $600 on fertility inputs alone, for a modest kitchen garden. A patch of 8 to 10 comfrey plants costs roughly $20 to $30 in root cuttings to establish. By year 2, those plants are producing enough leaf material to replace virtually all purchased fertilizer for fruiting crops. By year 3, you have surplus, enough to feed your compost pile, brew tea for container plants, and still mulch every tomato in the garden. The cost after year 1 is zero, not reduced, zero. Over a 10-year span, the savings are not trivial. They are hundreds of dollars that stay in your household instead of cycling through the garden center register every spring and summer. And unlike the bag of fertilizer that depletes the moment you spread it, the comfrey patch is still there next season, still producing, still pulling nutrients from deep underground and delivering them to your crops for free. That is the math that the fertilizer industry would rather you never ran. Not because comfrey is a threat to commercial agriculture, it is a backyard-scale plant, not a field crop replacement. But because once a home gardener realizes that a perennial plant can do the job of a product they have been buying every year, the purchasing habit breaks. And habits are what the entire retail fertility model depends on. There is one more piece to cover: how comfrey interacts with other parts of your garden system, and the few situations where it is not the right tool. Because as powerful as this plant is, using it well means understanding where it fits and where it does not. Comfrey is not a universal fertilizer. It is a specialist, and knowing what it does best and what it does not do well is the difference between using it effectively and being disappointed. The strength of comfrey is potassium. That makes it ideal for any crop that flowers and fruits: tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, eggplant, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, fruit trees. These are the crops that respond most dramatically to comfrey mulch and comfrey tea. During the weeks when those plants are setting flowers and swelling fruit, potassium is the nutrient they consume fastest. Comfrey delivers it in exactly the right form, at exactly the right time, directly to the root zone. For these crops, comfrey is not just a substitute for commercial fertilizer. In many cases, it outperforms it. But for leafy greens, lettuce, spinach, kale, chard, the equation is different. These crops are nitrogen hungry. They want fast, abundant nitrogen to push leaf growth. And while comfrey leaves do contain nitrogen, it is not their primary strength. If your garden is focused heavily on salad crops, comfrey alone will not give you the lush, rapid growth those plants need. You will still want a dedicated nitrogen source: aged manure, blood meal, or a well-balanced compost for leafy beds. Comfrey can supplement, but it should not be the sole fertility plan for nitrogen-demanding crops. This is not a weakness, it is just specificity. Comfrey does one job extraordinarily well. Pair it with a good compost system, and you have both sides covered. Potassium from the comfrey, nitrogen from the compost, and the need for purchased fertilizer drops to nearly nothing across the entire garden. Which brings up the smartest way to integrate comfrey into a home garden system. Most experienced growers do not treat comfrey as a standalone tool. They treat it as one leg of a closed-loop fertility triangle: comfrey for potassium, compost for nitrogen and general soil health, and mulch for moisture retention and weed suppression. All three work together. All three can be produced on-site for free. And together, they eliminate the annual fertilizer run almost entirely. Here is how that looks in practice. You maintain a small comfrey patch along a fence line or garden border. 8 to 12 plants is plenty for most kitchen gardens. Every 4 to 5 weeks from late spring through early autumn, you cut the leaves. Half go directly around fruiting crops as chop-and-drop mulch. A quarter go into a bucket to brew comfrey tea for containers and heavy feeders. The remaining quarter go onto the compost pile as an activator to speed decomposition and boost potassium content in the finished compost. That compost, once ready, gets spread on beds growing leafy greens, root crops, and anything else that needs balanced fertility. The cycle repeats every month through the season. Nothing is bought. Nothing is wasted. Every nutrient that leaves the soil through harvested vegetables comes back through comfrey, compost, and mulch. The loop closes tighter every year as the soil biology strengthens and the comfrey roots dig deeper. By year 3 or 4, you are working in a garden that feeds itself, and the only input it asks for is your time with a pair of shears a few mornings per season. There are a few situations where comfrey is not the right choice, and they are worth mentioning honestly. If your garden is very small, a few containers on a balcony, or a single 4x4 raised bed, dedicating space to a comfrey patch may not make sense. The plant itself takes up room, and in a tight space, that room might be better used for food production. In that case, comfrey tea brewed from leaves sourced elsewhere, a neighbor's patch, a community garden, a local permaculture group, gives you the fertility benefit without the space commitment. Many urban growers operate exactly this way. If your soil is already very high in potassium, which can happen in certain clay-heavy soils or in beds that have been heavily amended with wood ash over the years, adding more through comfrey mulch could push the balance off. Excess potassium can interfere with calcium and magnesium uptake in some crops. A basic soil test every 2 to 3 years, available through most cooperative extension offices in the US or through soil labs in the UK and Europe, will tell you where your levels stand. If potassium is already high, use comfrey primarily as a compost activator rather than a direct mulch, which dilutes the potassium input through the composting process. And one more thing that catches people off guard. Comfrey leaves have fine hairs that can cause skin irritation. Not in everyone, but enough people that it is worth wearing gloves every time you harvest. It is not a serious issue. It is not an allergic reaction in most cases. But if you spend 20 minutes cutting comfrey bare-handed on a warm day, your forearms may itch for the rest of the afternoon. Gloves solve it completely. Let me bring the whole picture into focus. What you are looking at with Bocking 14 Comfrey is not a gardening trend. It is not a hack. It is not a novelty. It is a perennial fertility system that was rigorously trialed in the 1950s and 60s, proven effective across decades of real-world use, sidelined by a health scare that had nothing to do with garden use, and quietly kept alive by organic growers who understood what they had. The plant pulls nutrients from depths your vegetables cannot reach. It loads those nutrients into fast-decomposing leaves that feed your soil within days of being cut. It produces 4 to 5 harvests per season, every season, for 20 years or more. It costs nothing to maintain. It replaces products you have been buying every year, and it makes your soil better every single time you use it. A patch of 10 plants along your fence line. That is all it takes. $20 in root cuttings and 1 season of patience while they establish. After that, you own a living fertilizer system that will outlast most of the tools in your shed. There is no bag at the garden center that can make that promise. There is no bottle of liquid feed that gets stronger every year instead of running out. There is no synthetic product that builds soil biology while it feeds your crops. Comfrey does all of it. Quietly, reliably, for decades. The only question is whether you are willing to plant it this spring and wait 1 season for the payoff. Everything after that is free. If this changed the way you think about feeding your garden, type GROW in the comments and hit the like button. It helps this reach more growers who are still spending money on something a single plant can do better. And if you are already growing comfrey, whether it is thriving or you hit problems in the first year, share what happened. Every experience helps someone else get it right the first time. That is how this community works.